When Bella, a healthy German shepherd, suddenly refused to give birth on the day everyone expected her to, her owner thought it was just fear. But when the vet placed his hands on her swollen belly, everything changed. His eyes widened, his voice trembled, and the words that came out of his mouth shocked everyone in the room. "Oh my God." And what was supposed to be a normal delivery turned into a moment that no one would ever forget. What the vet found inside Bella left the entire clinic stunned, and what happened next made headlines. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And I love seeing how far these stories travel. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The morning sunlight streamed softly through the kitchen window, warming the tiled floor where Bella lay curled up. She wasn't just any dog. Bella was a beautiful, loyal German shepherd with soft golden fur and eyes that always seemed to understand everything around her. For weeks, her owner, David, had been preparing for this day. The big day. The day Bella was supposed to give birth to her very first litter of puppies. Everything was ready. A warm, quiet corner of the living room had been turned into a little nest. Fresh blankets were laid out, clean water stood nearby, and David had taken the day off work. He had imagined this moment so many times. Bella, panting softly, the tiny cries of newborn puppies filling the air and the house brimming with joy. Bella, however, wasn't acting the way David expected. She usually wagged her tail in excitement every morning, but today, she lay still, breathing heavily. She shifted her body slightly and let out a soft whine. David crouched down beside her and stroked her head gently. "That's okay, girl," he whispered. "Today's the day, huh?" Bella's belly was round and tight, but she didn't look ready to push. She wasn't pacing or nesting like most dogs in labor. Instead, she just stared at David with wide, tired eyes. A strange silence filled the house. No excited barks, no restless movements, just heavy breathing. As the hours ticked by, David checked the clock again and again. Every minute that passed made his heart beat a little faster. Bella had shown all. The signs that labor was coming, restlessness, loss of appetite, nesting, but now, nothing. It was like something inside her had stopped everything at once. David called her name softly, trying to get some response, but she just laid her head back down. Her breathing grew shallow and uneven. "Come on, girl," he said with a nervous smile. "You're gonna be a mama soon." But deep down, his smile was just a mask. He could feel it. Something wasn't right. Outside, the neighborhood went on like any other day. But inside that quiet living room, time seemed to stand still. What was supposed to be the happiest day for Bella and David was slowly turning into a moment of quiet fear, and neither of them knew. This was only the beginning. The hours crept by like a slow, dragging clock. Bella remained lying on the same warm blanket, her head resting on her paws. Normally, when a dog goes into labor, there's movement, pacing, panting, soft whining, or scratching at the floor. But Bella wasn't doing any of that. She was quiet, too quiet. David sat on the floor beside her, his knees pulled up, eyes fixed on her every breath. He had read countless articles online, watched videos, and even spoken to the vet a week earlier. He knew what to expect: restlessness, signs of discomfort, contractions. But this strange calm didn't match anything he'd been told. He reached out and gently placed his hand on her belly. He expected to feel movement, little kicks or tiny shifts inside, but what he felt made his stomach tighten. Bella's breathing was shallow, her body tensed beneath his touch, but there was no movement from the puppies, not even a flutter. "Bella," David whispered, his voice trembling slightly. She blinked slowly, lifting her head just enough to look at him, then placed it back down with a soft sigh. It was like she wanted to tell him something was wrong, but couldn't. The house was silent. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. Outside, birds chirped faintly, but inside it felt like time had paused. David glanced at the whelping area he'd prepared with so much hope. Soft towels, heating pad, clean water bowls. It all looked perfect, except for the fact that nothing was happening. He grabbed his phone and checked the time again. Nearly 4 hours had passed since Bella had shown the first signs of labor. 4 long, silent hours. His chest tightened as he ran his fingers nervously through his hair. This wasn't normal. Bella let out a low, muffled whimper. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the stillness like a knife. David leaned closer immediately, his heart pounding. Her ears twitched and her body shivered slightly, but she didn't move. David swallowed hard. "We should have heard something by now," he muttered under his breath. He wasn't a vet, but every instinct in him was screaming that something wasn't right. The strange calm in the room no longer felt peaceful. It felt heavy, almost like a warning. And though David tried to stay strong for Bella, a quiet fear was already taking root in his heart. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the house had completely changed. What had started as a quiet morning full of excitement now felt like a storm brewing in slow motion. David's heart raced with every hour that passed. Bella was still lying on the blanket, her breathing uneven, her ears occasionally twitching at the slightest sound, but she refused to get up. David's sister, Emily, arrived after he called her, panic in his voice. The moment she stepped through the door, she knew something wasn't right. "She should have started by now," Emily said softly, kneeling next to Bella. She gently placed her palm on Bella's belly. Her face paled when she realized how tense it felt. Bella whimpered, a low sound that seemed to come from deep inside her chest. She wasn't being dramatic. She was in pain. Real pain. Emily glanced at David with wide, worried eyes. "This isn't normal." David nodded, but the lump in his throat made it hard to speak. He stroked Bella's head gently, whispering words of comfort. "It's okay, girl, we're here, you're safe." But even as he said it, he felt powerless. Emily started pacing across the living room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Maybe she's just scared," she said, more to herself than to David. "Maybe it'll start any minute." But her voice didn't sound convincing. Bella shifted slightly and let out another sharp, painful whine. Her breathing quickened for a moment, then slowed again. No contractions, no pushing, just silent suffering. David checked the clock again. 6 hours had passed since the first signs of labor. 6 long, heavy hours. His chest felt tight, and his hands were cold. He thought about all the times Bella had run happily across the yard, tail wagging, her energy endless. Now she looked weak, exhausted, and helpless. The fear in the room grew heavier by the minute. Emily stopped pacing and turned to him. "We can't wait anymore," she said firmly. If something's wrong, she could lose the puppies. Or worse. David stared at Bella. She looked back at him with those big brown eyes, trusting him completely, even in pain. And that broke him inside. He exhaled shakily. "Okay," he whispered. "We're going to the vet. Right now." As he lifted Bella gently, her soft whimper echoed through the house. The fear that had been quietly growing was now undeniable. Something was seriously wrong. The sky had turned gray by the time David carefully carried Bella to the car. A cool wind rushed across the driveway, and a light drizzle began to fall, soft at first, then steady. It was as if the weather itself had sensed something was wrong. David gently laid Bella on a thick blanket in the back seat. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes half open. Emily climbed in beside her, stroking her head softly. "Hang in there, girl," David whispered as he started the engine. His hands were trembling slightly on the steering wheel. He'd driven this route hundreds of times before, but never like this. Not with fear clawing at his chest. The windshield wipers swiped back and forth in a steady rhythm. Every second felt like a minute. Every turn of the road stretched longer than it should. Bella whimpered softly in the back, the sound weak and tired. Emily glanced down at her, fighting to keep her voice steady. "She's in pain, David. Please hurry." "I'm trying," he muttered, pressing harder on the accelerator. The clinic wasn't far, but tonight it felt miles away. The road was nearly empty, and the low hum of the car engine was broken only by Bella's quiet, shaky breaths. Emily kept her hand on Bella's belly. "She's so tense," she whispered, her voice cracking. She's not moving at all. David's knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it over the rain. Thoughts raced through his mind. What if they were too late? What if something happened to Bella or the puppies? The idea was unbearable. A red light flashed ahead and David slowed down, tapping the steering wheel anxiously. Emily leaned closer to Bella, whispering gently, "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer." Bella's ears twitched faintly, but she didn't lift her head. As the light turned green, David sped through the empty intersection. The glowing sign of the veterinary clinic finally came into view. Relief hit him like a wave, but it was tangled with fear. When he pulled up to the entrance, 2 staff members rushed out with a stretcher. "We've got her," one of them said firmly. David stepped out of the car, his heart hammering in his chest. The rain soaked his hair, but he didn't even notice. Bella was being wheeled inside, and all he could do was follow, hoping they weren't too late. The clinic smelled faintly of disinfectant and clean linen. Fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as David and Emily followed the vet team down the hallway. Bella lay on the stretcher, her head resting limply against the soft padding. She didn't bark. She didn't resist. She just breathed in shallow, uneven rhythms. That quietness terrified David more than anything else. Dr. Miller, the senior veterinarian, met them in the emergency room. A calm but serious man, he had treated Bella since she was a puppy. The moment he saw her condition, his composed expression shifted ever so slightly. "How long has she been like this?" he asked quickly, gently placing his hands on her swollen belly. David swallowed hard. "She started showing signs this morning." But nothing happened. No contractions, no movement. Dr. Miller's brow furrowed as he pressed gently against Bella's side, feeling for the puppies. His practiced hands moved slowly, carefully, but David could see the worry forming in the vet's eyes. Bella whimpered softly, her ears twitching as the vet's hands moved lower. "Easy, girl," he murmured to her. But he was already frowning. Something wasn't right. Emily stood frozen near the door, her hands clasped tightly together. David's heart pounded against his ribs like a drum. He had seen Bella run across the yard, chase sticks, bark at butterflies, but he had never seen her like this. Weak, vulnerable, silent. Dr. Miller finally straightened up, exhaling through his nose. "Her labor hasn't progressed, and the abdomen is too firm. That's not normal at this stage," he said carefully, his voice low but steady. "We need to find out what's causing the blockage." "Blockage?" David repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "Yes," the vet replied. "There could be a puppy stuck. Or something else stopping the delivery." His eyes flicked toward the nurse. "Get the ultrasound ready, now." Bella let out another faint whimper, this one sharper than before. David moved closer to her, crouching down and holding her paw gently. "I'm here, Bella, I promise," he whispered, even though his voice was shaking. The vet nurse rolled in the ultrasound machine, the soft beeping filling the room like a warning. David could feel the air growing heavier with every passing second. Dr. Miller prepared the probe and gel with practiced precision. "David," he said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Whatever's happening, we need to act fast." David nodded, his throat too tight to speak. His heart knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how bad it was about to get. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ultrasound machine. David stood near Bella's head, gently stroking her ear, while Emily hovered in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Dr. Miller pressed the cold probe against Bella's belly, moving it slowly, his eyes fixed on the flickering monitor. David couldn't make sense of what he was seeing, but the vet's face said everything. His expression shifted from focused to tense to something far more serious. His brow furrowed deeper and his lips tightened into a thin line. "Doctor?" David finally asked, his voice shaking. Dr. Miller didn't answer right away. He leaned in closer to the monitor, adjusting the angle. His nurse stood silently beside him, watching, her face pale. "This isn't normal," he muttered under his breath. David's heart thudded in his chest. The words echoed in his mind like an alarm. "What do you mean it's not normal?" he asked again, louder this time. Dr. Miller straightened up, wiping the gel from Bella's belly with a towel. "She's in distress," he said slowly. "Her labor should have progressed hours ago. There's something blocking the birth canal. Emily stepped forward nervously. A puppy? The vet hesitated. It could be, but the positioning doesn't look right. He gestured to the nurse. Call Dr. Sanders, we'll need backup in here. The nurse rushed out. David gripped Bella's paw a little tighter. She whimpered softly as if responding to his fear. Her breathing had grown more uneven, her body trembling lightly with each exhale. Bella, hang on, sweetheart, David whispered, his voice cracking. Dr. Miller turned to him. His usual calm tone was replaced with something firmer. David, listen to me. We need to move quickly. If this continues much longer, we could lose the puppies, and Bella could be at risk too. The words hit him like a punch. Lose Bella? That thought alone sent a chill racing through his entire body. He had raised her since she was a small ball of fur, full of energy and love. She wasn't just a dog. She was family. Another vet entered the room, and the quiet space turned into a rush of low, urgent voices. Machines beeped, instruments clinked, and the air filled with tension. Dr. Miller leaned down one last time, whispering to his assistant. Then he looked at David and said the words that made his stomach drop. We need to prepare for an emergency. Right now. Dr. Sanders entered the room briskly, pulling on gloves as Dr. Miller quickly filled him in. Bella lay completely still now, her breathing shallow but steady, her brown eyes blinking slowly. David knelt beside her, whispering her name like a quiet prayer. Everything around him felt muffled. The beeping of the monitors, the rustle of medical gowns, the sound of footsteps, all fading into a single moment of dread. Dr. Miller adjusted the ultrasound machine again, this time with Dr. Sanders by his side. They exchanged a quick, worried glance before focusing on the black and white screen. The probe moved gently over Bella's round belly, the gel shining under the harsh clinic lights. David stared at the monitor. All he saw were blurry shapes and shadows, but the doctors saw something else. Dr. Sanders froze for a second, leaning in closer. His eyes widened and his gloved hand paused midair. What is that? Emily whispered from behind him. No one answered. Dr. Miller's voice dropped to a whisper. Oh my God. David's heart stopped. What's wrong? His voice cracked, trembling with fear. The vet slowly turned his head toward David, and in that split second, David knew this wasn't a normal delivery complication. Dr. Miller took a breath, then pointed to the screen. There's something inside her womb. It's not just the puppies. Emily's hands flew to her mouth. What do you mean, not just the puppies? Dr. Sanders tapped the monitor gently, tracing the faint shape on the screen. One of the fetuses is positioned abnormally, and there's a large mass behind it. It could be a tumor or it could be a growth pressing against the canal. David felt the floor tilt beneath him. A tumor? Dr. Miller nodded grimly. It's rare, but it happens. That's why her labor isn't progressing. Her body is trying, but something inside is blocking everything. Bella whimpered softly. Her paw twitched against David's hand as if responding to his rising panic. Dr. Sanders straightened up, his voice calm but firm. We don't have time. If we don't operate now, we risk losing her and the entire litter. The nurse quickly prepared the surgical cart. Instruments clinked against metal trays. The room transformed from quiet uncertainty to urgent movement in seconds. David leaned over Bella, whispering shakily, You're gonna be okay, girl. I promise, but deep down he couldn't stop replaying those 3 words in his head, not just the puppies. The hallway outside the surgery room buzzed with movement. Nurses rushed in and out carrying trays, equipment, and sterile gloves. David stood frozen near the wall, his hands pressed together tightly, his heart pounding so hard it felt like the walls themselves could hear it. Inside, Bella was being prepped for an emergency C-section. He had never felt so helpless in his life. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. She's strong, David. Bella's strong. She'll get through this, she whispered, trying to sound steady even though her own voice trembled. Through the small glass panel on the door, David caught glimpses of the room. Bright white lights, masked faces, the glimmer of metal instruments. Dr. Miller and Dr. Sanders stood on either side of Bella, working quickly and quietly. The steady beeping of the monitor echoed like a ticking clock. Inside, the tension was thick. Dr. Miller carefully guided the surgical incision while Dr. Sanders adjusted the instruments. The mass is close to the birth canal, Dr. Miller said under his breath. We have to move carefully. One wrong step and we could lose her. Her vitals are stable, the nurse said quickly, but time's running short. When they reached the obstruction, both vets froze for a split second. Dr. Sanders's eyes widened. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What is it?" The nurse asked, panic edging into her voice. "It's not a tumor," Dr. Miller said, his voice steady but astonished. "It's a dead pup. A stillborn. It's been blocking the entire passage." Outside, David saw movement through the glass, a flurry of hands, focused faces. He had no idea what was happening inside, but his chest ached with every second that passed. Inside, Dr. Sanders gently lifted the lifeless body of the stillborn pup, placing it carefully on a tray. "That's why she couldn't deliver," he murmured. "The poor girl's been in pain for hours. They moved quickly now." With the blockage cleared, Dr. Miller guided the next puppy out carefully. The nurse gently rubbed the tiny body with a warm towel. For a heartbeat, there was silence, and then a weak but unmistakable cry filled the room. A wave of relief swept through the team. "We've got one," Dr. Sanders said with a small smile. Outside, David clenched his fists, tears burning in his eyes. He didn't know what had just happened, but when he heard that faint cry through the glass door, something inside him broke, in the best possible way. Bella had a fighting chance. Inside the brightly lit surgery room, the energy had shifted from tense uncertainty to focused urgency. The first puppy's weak cry still echoed in the room, giving the entire team a surge of hope. But the battle wasn't over yet, not even close. Dr. Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, his gloved hand steady despite the intensity of the moment. "All right," he said to his team, his voice calm but firm. "We're moving to the next one. We have to keep this rhythm." Bella lay on the table, her body wrapped gently in warm towels. Though sedated, her breathing was steady, her heartbeat strong. The monitor beeped in a steady rhythm, a reminder of how fragile but resilient life could be. Dr. Sanders guided the surgical tools carefully, his movements precise and deliberate. "This one's a little deeper," he said, glancing at the ultrasound monitor positioned nearby. "But I can feel it." The nurse leaned forward with a clean towel in hand, ready. Everyone in the room moved like a well-rehearsed orchestra, quick, coordinated, and silent except for the soft sound of beeping machines and the vet's short, focused instructions. Outside the room, David paced the hallway with his hands tangled in his hair. Emily sat on one of the plastic chairs, silently praying. Every few minutes, they'd both glance at the surgery door, hoping for a sign. Any sign. Inside, Dr. Sanders carefully lifted another tiny pup into the world. For a heartbeat, there was silence again. Then the nurse gently rubbed the little body with the towel. A soft, fragile whimper broke the quiet. "That's two," Dr. Miller announced. His voice carried both relief and determination. The team worked quickly to clear the remaining puppies. Each time they brought out a new life, the tension in the room loosened just a little more. 3 puppies. 4, then 5. Some cried out loud and strong. Others needed gentle coaxing before their tiny lungs filled with air. Bella's vital signs stayed steady throughout, but the vets knew every second mattered. This wasn't just any birth. This was a fight for every little heartbeat inside her. Outside, David froze when the door finally opened. A nurse stepped out briefly, her eyes shining behind her mask. "She's holding on," she said softly. "And the puppies. They're alive." David exhaled shakily, gripping Emily's hand. Inside, the team wasn't done yet, but for the first time that day, hope was louder than fear. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop inside the surgery room. The air was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Everyone waited. The vet team leaned closer over the tiny, motionless body of the first puppy. It was so small, fragile, its fur still slick and wet. Dr. Sanders rubbed the little chest with gentle but firm motions while the nurse warmed it with a soft towel. "Come on, little one," Dr. Sanders whispered, his voice quiet but urgent. David, still outside, stared at the surgery door with a pounding heart. He didn't know what was happening in there, but he could feel the weight of every passing second. Emily's hand gripped his tightly. They both leaned forward as if they could somehow will Bella and her pups to be okay. Inside, Dr. Miller leaned over, pressing his stethoscope gently against the tiny chest. "No rhythm yet," he said under his breath. "Keep stimulating." The nurse gently suctioned the puppy's mouth and nose, clearing the fluid. The room was silent except for the steady beeping of Bella's heart monitor and the quiet rustle of hands working with care. Everyone in that room knew this moment could tip either way, life or loss. Then it happened. A sharp, tiny sound pierced the silence. It wasn't loud. It wasn't strong. But it was enough. The puppy let out its very first cry. The nurse's eyes lit up as she let out a breath she didn't even realize she was holding. "We've got one," she said softly, a small smile breaking through the mask. Dr. Sanders exhaled deeply, almost collapsing with relief. "Good job, little fighter," he whispered, wrapping the pup gently in a warm towel. The weak cry grew louder, turning into small, steady squeaks as the tiny chest rose and fell with new life. Outside the door, David heard it. The faint but clear sound of a newborn cry carried through the hallway. He froze. Emily looked at him wide-eyed. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. David's throat tightened as emotion flooded him. His hands trembled. "Yeah, I did." For the first time that day, a spark of hope lit inside him. The fear was still there, heavy and real, but now it had a sound to fight against. A tiny heartbeat in the form of a cry. Inside, the medical team moved on to the next puppy. Their energy lifted. The battle wasn't over, but they had their first victory, and sometimes, one cry is all it takes to turn fear into fight. David thought the sound of that first tiny cry was the moment everything would be okay. It felt like a sign, like Bella and her puppies had made it through the worst. But inside the surgery room, the vets weren't celebrating. Not yet. Dr. Sanders passed the first pup to the nurse, who gently placed it in a small incubator lined with warm towels. Dr. Miller turned back to Bella, his expression tense once again. "We still have more in there," he said in a low voice. "And something doesn't feel right." The ultrasound screen still showed one more faint shadow deep inside Bella's womb. The positioning was odd, not like the others they'd already delivered. It wasn't moving. "Could it be another stillborn?" the nurse asked quietly. Dr. Sanders didn't answer immediately. His hands were steady, but his eyes were sharp. He moved the probe again, tracing the outline carefully. The shadow didn't shift. "It's possible," he finally said. "Or it's stuck." Outside the door, David paced like a man who couldn't breathe. Every minute was torture. Emily watched him nervously, chewing at her lip. She wanted to say something to calm him, but the truth was, she was just as scared. Inside, the room grew heavier with silence. Dr. Miller adjusted his gloves and leaned in. "Let's go in carefully. We can't afford to lose Bella. She's already weak." Dr. Sanders nodded. His hands moved slowly, precisely, like someone defusing a bomb. Minutes passed like hours. Sweat formed under the vets' masks, their movements deliberate and quiet. Then Dr. Sanders froze. "Wait, I feel something." The nurse leaned in. "What is it?" He carefully lifted the last pup. It was limp still, but not gone. "There's a heartbeat," he said sharply. "Weak, but it's there." The team sprang into action. Towels, suction, rubbing, warming. The same process began all over again, but this time there was no sound at first. "No cry." Dr. Miller pressed the stethoscope against the tiny chest. His brow furrowed. Dr. Sanders rubbed the little body harder, whispering, "Come on. Come on, baby." Finally, after what felt like forever, a sound. Faint. Fragile. But real. The nurse let out a soft gasp. "We've got it." Outside, David and Emily heard the door open. A nurse stepped out with tired eyes but a small, reassuring smile. "There was one more," she said softly. "And it's alive." David sank into the chair, his hands covering his face. Relief crashed over him like a wave. But deep inside, he knew Bella wasn't out of danger yet. The operating room was a mess of scattered towels, blinking monitors, and exhausted faces. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something heavier, the weight of everything they had just fought through. The last pup's weak cry echoed softly in the background, a sound that felt like the slow return of hope. Dr. Miller removed his gloves carefully, his hands trembling just slightly. For years he had delivered countless litters, assisted in hundreds of births, but this one was different. This one had been a battle. He stood there for a moment, looking at Bella, sedated but breathing steadily, and something in his chest tightened. Dr. Sanders let out a long breath, leaning against the counter. "That was close," he muttered. His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had just stared at the line between life and death, and managed to pull it back. The nurse gently checked each pup in the incubator. Tiny warm bodies nestled against each other, their small chests rising and falling like fragile miracles. "They're stable," she whispered. Dr. Miller moved closer to Bella, resting his hand gently on her head. "She's a fighter," he said softly. "I honestly didn't know if she'd make it through that." His voice cracked just slightly at the end, betraying the calm professional exterior he usually carried. Emily peeked through the small window in the door, her hands pressed against the glass. David stood just behind her, his eyes red from holding back tears. He saw Dr. Miller's face, not the confident, steady expression he had seen 100 times before, but something more human, vulnerable. The nurse looked at Dr. Miller carefully. "You okay?" she asked gently. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Yeah, just—" "We almost lost her. And them." He turned to the team, his voice quiet but firm. "I've seen dogs give up when they're in that much pain. But she didn't, she held on." For a brief moment, no one said anything. The beeping of the monitor filled the silence, steady and strong. Dr. Sanders nodded, his voice low. "She's one of the lucky ones. And so are they." Dr. Miller took a deep breath, then turned toward the door where David was standing. His eyes met David's through the glass, and with a tired but genuine smile, he mouthed 2 simple words: "She's okay." David pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the weight of the day finally ease, if only just a little. For the first time since morning, the fear began to fade. The night air outside the clinic was cool and quiet, but inside, the room still pulsed with the warmth of new life. The sterile, tense environment from just an hour ago now felt completely different. The incubator glowed softly, casting a gentle light over the tiny, squirming pups inside. Their little bodies pressed together for warmth, their soft whimpers filling the room like a lullaby. Dr. Miller checked each one again, his movement slower now, no longer rushed but full of care. "All 6 of them are stable," he said, his voice finally free of the weight it carried earlier. "And their heartbeats are strong." Emily wiped away tears she didn't even realize had fallen. David stood beside her, his hands resting on the edge of the incubator, his eyes fixed on the newborn pups. They were so tiny, so fragile, yet somehow they had survived everything stacked against them. On the operating table, Bella was slowly waking from sedation. Her breathing was steady, her ears twitching slightly at the sound of her puppies. The nurse adjusted the warm blankets around her, whispering softly, "You did so good, girl." "So good." David knelt beside Bella and placed his hand gently on her paw. She blinked groggily, then focused on him. Her tail moved weakly but surely. It was a small gesture, but to David it felt like the world. When the nurse carefully placed the first pup next to Bella, something magical happened. Bella's instinct kicked in immediately. Her head lowered, her nose touched the tiny body, and she let out a soft, warm sound. A mother's sound. One by one, the pups were moved to her side. Bella adjusted herself carefully despite the weakness, pulling them closer with her head. The whimpers grew louder, but it wasn't fear this time, it was life. It was the sound of survival. David's throat tightened. He wasn't someone who cried easily, but in that moment it was impossible to hold it in. These weren't just puppies. They were fighters. And so was she. Dr. Sanders crossed his arms and let out a long breath, a faint smile forming beneath his mask. "That," he said softly, "is a miracle in the making." The vet team stood back, watching as Bella and her newborns nestled together. The clinic, once filled with panic, was now wrapped in the quiet magic of new beginnings. For the first time all day, David felt his heart lighten. Against all odds, Bella had done it. The operating lights had dimmed and the clinic had grown quiet. The storm of panic and rushing footsteps from earlier felt like a distant memory now. Bella lay on a soft blanket near the incubator, her 6 tiny puppies snuggled close against her warm belly. Their faint, rhythmic squeaks filled the room like the purest music David had ever heard. Dr. Miller walked over slowly, no longer in his surgical gown, but with his stethoscope still draped around his neck. His face carried the exhaustion of the night, but also something else. Pride. David looked up as the vet approached. "How is she?" His voice was soft, almost scared to break the peaceful moment. Dr. Miller crouched down next to Bella, gently placing a hand on her head. "She's stable," he said. tired but strong. She pulled through something that most dogs wouldn't have survived. Emily stood nearby, watching every word, every movement. She had seen many moments in her life, but none like this. Dr. Sanders joined them, leaning against the wall with a faint smile. "You've got a real fighter here," he said. "What happened tonight? It wasn't just luck. That dog wanted to live." David's eyes drifted toward Bella, who was licking one of her pups softly, her tail wagging weakly but steadily. "She saved them," he whispered. Dr. Miller nodded slowly. "And in a way, they saved her too. That blockage could have killed her, if she had given up even an hour earlier." His voice trailed off, the weight of what could have been hanging in the air. The nurse adjusted the heat lamp over the puppies, smiling softly. "She's a mother in every sense of the word." Then Dr. Miller turned to David, his expression serious but gentle. "You should know something," he began. "Most animals in this kind of situation don't make it. Not the mother, not the pups. But Bella, she's special. She fought through pain, exhaustion, and fear, and she didn't stop. What you witnessed here tonight wasn't just a birth. It was survival." David swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Thank you," he whispered. "All of you." Dr. Miller shook his head with a tired smile. "No, thank her." He nodded toward Bella, who let out a quiet, content sigh, surrounded by the lives she had fought so hard to bring into the world. In that moment, everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just another case. This was a story none of them would ever forget. The first rays of dawn slipped through the clinic windows, painting the room in a soft, golden glow. Outside, the world was waking up, but inside, something far more precious had already begun. Bella lay curled up on a thick blanket, her 6 tiny puppies nestled tightly against her warm belly. Their small bodies rose and fell with each quiet breath, their whimpers like little songs of life. David sat cross-legged on the floor beside her, his back against the wall. He hadn't slept a single second, but he didn't care. All night he had watched Bella fight for her life and for the lives of her babies. Now, seeing her resting peacefully, a calmness washed over him he hadn't felt in years. Emily sat next to him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "They made it," she whispered, smiling softly. David nodded, his eyes never leaving Bella and her pups. "Yeah, they did." Dr. Miller and Dr. Sanders entered the room quietly. The exhaustion on their faces hadn't faded, but neither had the quiet pride in their eyes. They checked Bella's vitals, examined each tiny pup, and then finally stepped back. "She's healing well," Dr. Miller said gently, "and the puppies are strong. If they keep this up, they'll all grow healthy." David ran a hand through his hair, still processing everything that had happened. Just hours ago, he had been terrified of losing her. Now she was lying there, a living miracle. Bella lifted her head weakly, her brown eyes finding David's. She gave a soft, tired wag of her tail. David moved closer, placing his hand gently on her paw. "You're incredible, you know that?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The puppies shifted, searching for warmth, and Bella instinctively adjusted herself, wrapping them closer. Watching her, David felt something change deep inside him. This wasn't just relief. It was something bigger. Emily glanced at him, smiling. "You'll have your hands full with 6 of them." David laughed softly for the first time in what felt like forever. "Yeah, and I wouldn't have it any other way." As the vets quietly stepped out, leaving the new little family to rest, the room fell into a peaceful silence. Morning had come, but for David, Bella, and the 6 tiny lives she fought so hard to bring into the world, this wasn't just a new day. It was a new beginning.